I'm gonna try putting this on Twitter because I'm now finally getting around to using Twitter. Wow, you shut up quickly. How's it going? I'm just gonna drop a tweet off really quick. And then, yeah, I'm just gonna work on re-sleeving some stuff and talking. Give me just a minute. All right. Cool. All right, let's get that closed. My camera here will freeze on occasion, so I just will have to fix that if it happens. Yeah. Welcome. Ooh, how's the Medax deck working? Haven't gotten around to messing around with too many of that stuff, or those like decks. But I'm hoping in the next like 6 weeks, since we don't have many competitive events going on, I'm gonna try out some different decks, see how they feel. Yeah, so I'm just gonna jump in and chat. Feel free to ask any questions. But yeah, so I played 4 ProQuests, and then obviously calling Indianapolis. And I guess I'll just jump in with the first one. First one was the Max ProQuest. I think I posted deck lists and all that good stuff across the season. Only a handful of cards changed, but Min-Max ProQuest, I think we had just under 60 or just over 60. I think it was just over 60. And I don't remember the exact breakdown of the meta, but in my local area, I'm very disproportionate amount of Dromas, probably compared to what there should be. Hey Adnan, how's it going? Good to see you stopping by. Don't stay up too late. It's probably not going to be any crazy condensed knowledge here, but I'm just kind of going to go through all the ProQuests that I played in and then indie recap. Yeah, so the Min-Max ProQuest started out with a round 1 on stream against Levia. It was a newer player, so unfortunately it was a bit tough for them. Game was not particularly close, kind of just ran hot, so it's a common occurrence in a lot of early events. Obviously, since the first round of any event is going to be just paired randomly, it's pretty common that there's going to be an kind of uneven pairing. Sometimes you get paired into someone really good, sometimes someone who is not as practiced. Yeah, Ashen Wings, how's it going? But yeah, so my round 1 was over pretty quickly against Levia at the Min-Max ProQuest. Round 2, I played against a Phi. Now so this is like a month ago, so I have it all written down what my matchups were, but I'm gonna try and remember details as I go. My round 2 against Phi was pretty close. And I think I've mentioned it many times, but I really think that the Azalea Phi matchup is a lot closer than people give it credit for. But I was able to get there. feel like there was a big noteworthy turn or interaction that put me ahead, but I can't remember it right off. Ooh, gonna play Lexi tomorrow. I was debating sleeving up something different for tomorrow, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm definitely gonna be sleeving up different decks over the next like 6 weeks. So yeah, I did end up getting there against the Phi. My round 3 was against a Dromai, which going into ProQuest season, or I guess prior to ProQuest season, I was not running any poppers. I kind of had just said, Dromai doesn't exist, Dromai can't hurt me. But like I said, my local meta is disproportionately Dromai heavy and also Bravo heavy. So I kind of just went, well, I have to respect them. I can't ignore them entirely. As far as decks that I'm looking to play, it's funny, there's none I really want to play, but just as far as improving as a player, I realize I need to pick up other decks and play them during this time, because I'm not going to learn anything, or I'm not going to have any like groundbreaking discoveries playing Azalea more. In order to improve as a player, I think my time is best spent trying other decks across the next 6 weeks. So that's what I'm going to end up doing. So yeah, I actually have no idea. But yeah, so my round 3 Dromai at min-max, it was a very close game. I've added it. Oh, camera's frozen. That's what it is. I've added in poppers as yeah, exactly, Rachel. I wish. But yeah, I added in the poppers, and this was my first like competitive event with the new poppers, and it made the world of a difference. Like, it was insane how much poppers helped. Just being able to, like, 1, it stops the damage, but 2, it also lets me send another like 5 damage at them that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So just drawing a popper ends up translating to like probably something like 8 value on a single card, and that matchup was like almost manageable without it. And now that I've added the poppers, it feels like it sounds absurd to say, but it almost feels close. Like, across my entire competitive season, spoiler, I did actually have a winning record into Dromai. I think I went like, I want to say 5-2. It's something crazy. But either way, this was kind of the first like real testing in like a competitive setting that I had against Dromai. And the game was super close, got down to like 1 or 2, but I was able to get there in the end. So I started out 3-0. Going 4-0 would lock me for top 8. But, of course, Brandon got in my way. So our locals know Brandon. He's a newer player who he just picked up Bravo. He's been playing like a month or 2. And going into this event, he was like, man, I don't think I should play in this event. I'm not good enough. I don't know all the other matchups and the decks. And and then I'm like, no, you need to go. You're doing great. Like, just playing against him, I was like, this guy understands card games. And he has this big background in card games. And so he's like, fine, I'll go. And so I'm checking with him between rounds, and he's 3-0 as well. And then, as you can tell from the story, where the story's going, round 4, I pair into Brandon, who didn't want to come, and I convinced him to come. And I'm like, oh boy. He's on Bravo. And one of the last times I had played against him, he ran really hot and like CNC pummels and everything, and he had gotten me the last time we played, so it's like, oh boy, this was my kind of lock for top 8 round. And I'm like, man, if I lose to him, I'm not going to be happy. And so the game's going well. I'm pretty reasonably ahead. And then all of a sudden I draw a hand with a D-React and Arsenal. I think it was like two blocks, and then 2 more D-reacts, at which point I get CNC pummeled. I lose, like, basically all the tempo I had. Oh, sorry, and the two blocks in my hand were non-attacks, non-take aims. No, one was a take aim. I take that back. One was a take aim. So I end up losing the D-react in Arsenal. I lose one of the D-reacts from hand, discarding. Take aim, reload. Opt, nothing. Azalea ability, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, I just took 10, and now we're Arsenal passing. Arsenal the last D-react, and he CNCs me again. And so I had to throw multiple cards in front. Or no. Yeah. So, sorry. I did the blind Azalea, like I said, and I hit a Deadeye, so I had to give my Tunic resource to clear the Deadeye, Arsenal the D-react. Then I get CNC'd again, and at that point, I just lost so much tempo, and he ended up winning the game off of it. And so, I know I just said I'd be annoyed with him, but actually I was kind of proud of him. Having him come in and lock top 8 by round 4 on his first competitive event was actually really cool to see. So, annoyed that he had knocked me out of my lock, but happy for him. So that was my round 4. I'm now 3-1. With the amount of players we had, it was 6 rounds, and it was going to be, you could either start 4-0 to lock, otherwise you'd need to go 4-1 across your first 5 rounds. So I played against a Rhinar in my 5th round, and it was a reasonably close game, but both of us were kind of nervous. The Rhinar Azalea matchup is a little bit versatile, and obviously we both knew that if you lose, you're out of top 8 contention there. So I did end up getting there, but it was a rather close game. I don't remember any crazy details about it. Yeah, I can't remember too many crazy details about it, but I believe it was pretty close. And then at that point, I'm now 4-1, and I'm pretty sure I need to win my round 6 in order to make top 8. Looking back, I don't think I actually did, but obviously better safe than sorry. But my round 6 was another Dromai, and I was a little bit annoyed. It was going to be my win in. I also got the pair down, so having the Dromai have a shot at killing my tournament was it's a little frustrating. But I think during that Dromai game, I think that was like the hottest I've ever drawn against a Dromai. It was actually insane how hard I high rolled that game. Everything lined up. I had massive Rain Razor Bolt and Shot turns into like Red in the Ledger 11 dominate, into Red in the Ledger 14 dominate, into, I think at the end I ended up going with like a E-Strike Snapdragon Tunic Bolt and Shot with Death Dealer Rain Razors into like a Drill Shot, like some 23 damage turn or something wild. It was absurd. I ran so hot that game, and I didn't feel that bad because my opponent was on Dromai, so they deserved it. I'm kidding. Nothing against any Dromai players, but yeah. So that locked me top 8 and got me 5th seed. Yeah, actually, I've actually started to enjoy the Dromai matchup. I think it's interesting. Yeah, Noah, I would actually be curious for us to play some games again at some point. I think it's still bad, but I've added poppers and it feels like a game. Even if I'm unfavored, it feels like a game. And also hello to Noah. So yeah, that was me locking top 8. I went 5-1 in Swiss. It feels like a game. I don't think it's great, but it's a lot more of a game than it used to be. Don't worry, I won't say it has to be a money match. Although actually that would be a great money match for you. Yeah, so top 8. I was 5th seed. Brandon, my Bravo lost in round 4. Yeah, in round 4. Just fun games, just fun games. My Bravo loss to Brandon was my pairing in top 8. So we got the rematch. Also notably, both times I played against him, he went first and heaved Pulverize on turn 0. So that made those games difficult. But in the top 8 game, there were not any CNC pummels. So I was able to just out mid-range him and ended up getting there. And then my top 4 was against Arjun, playing Dash, and it was interesting going into top 8, or I guess he was first seed. So going into top 8, I assumed that it was open deck list because of like stream stuff. And so I had time to prepare, but I didn't actually know what version of Dash he was on. And so I went with my standard hedged sideboard that I normally do, which was like 65 cards with like sync belows and that all you got. And he ended up playing a pistol plan with reinforce the lines and all that good stuff. And I ended up stumbling at the end and just wasn't quite able to get there. The D-React draws were a little too clunky. And by that point, he had all his items set up and he had a big high-octane turn. And I think I had to go for a blind Azalea at one point and hit like a blue Bolton shot. But it was a super close game, but I did end up dropping it. And after that, I went, okay, I'm no longer playing 65 into Dash. Previously, the reason had been, you play into a fatigue deck, you board up a little bit, and that kind of clicked at originally, but the more I thought about it, and with the suggestions of some people in the Discord and their experiences in the matchup, is that you can't afford for the game to go long against a pistol Dash. So even if they would block you out, having a few extra cards doesn't matter because in that last few cards, they're so much more efficient that you're just going to die. So there's no real reason to play over 60. And I think that matchup probably looks different had I boarded down to 60. But yeah, so I finished that. It was 5th seed in Swiss and then lost in top 4. Hey Harley, how's it going? But yeah, that was the Min-Max ProQuest. The next ProQuest we did was the very next day. Couple of friends, Mike, Marcus, and Rachel, and I all went up to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was a long day. So we get up there, and that event did not go great. All right, I won't mention too heavily how everyone else did, but round 1 I played Bravo, and it was actually a really interesting game. He went first and heaved Pulverize. Notably, my Bravo opponents were 3 for 3 on going first and heaving Pulverize turn 0. And the game was going fine, and then I hit a game state where I came in with a Remorseless for 11, and he blocked with 2 cards. I believe it was a Blue Pummel and a Spinal Crush. Yeah, a Blue Pummel and a Spinal Crush. And my camera froze. Not that you guys really care about my sleeving, but I needed something to be on screen. And so, based on like the health totals, based on the way he blocked, it was a Remorseless with Seek and Destroy. He then just swung Hammer, or pitched a blue to Tectonic Plating and then swung Hammer. And I made the read that at that point there could be 3 cards in his arsenal, or 3 different things. It could be the last red pummel, it could be a Crippling Crush, or it could be a defense reaction. And I ended up saying I don't think I can play around the red pummel, so I went, okay, if you have the red pummel, you got it, and he had the red pummel. So I ended up losing that game. However, looking back on it later that day, I realized that my analysis of what card could be in the arsenal was incorrect. If it was either that defense reaction or the crippling crush, he would have just thrown his entire hand in front of the attack in order to prevent the seek and destroy on hit. So even though there was only one left in the deck, the correct read was that it was exactly a red or a blue pummel, and most likely red, because for a blue, I think he also would have thrown his hand in front. So I would call that kind of a major mistake, that I should have read that it was a red pummel. Yeah, just should have read it was a red pummel. Hey, Antonio, how's it going? And even though blocking for the red pummel puts me in a losing game state, which was kind of the assumption, is if I block like it's a red pummel, I'm in a losing game state and I probably don't win from that point anyways. It was better than guaranteed losing on the spot, because kind of the way the situation played out is I should have known it could only be the red pummel. But it's a lesson to learn from that game. My round 2 was a bye, so we take those, I suppose. It was 1-1. My round 3 was an OTK Viserai, which was actually pretty scary because he made like 5 rune chance on turn 0 going first. Is it 5? Might have actually been more. 8? It was something crazy. But I was super far behind in that game. But I was able to claw it out in a very, very close game where it got down to like 1-1, and he was just holding a blue and swinging, Dread Scythe? So where it was eating 2 cards from me, where I had to pitch to the Arcane, and then I also had to pitch to, and then I had to block with a card. They're interesting, but I think they just die to aggro, which is kind of the concern. And I don't think they can sideboard well enough to do okay into aggro. But yeah, I did end up getting there, but that was a very, very close game. My next round was against a Dromai, and just nothing went right that game. I still got him down reasonably low, but the board overwhelmed me too early, where he was still on like 30, and he had like 4 dragons in play. I got him down to like 10 still, but it was just way too far behind. So yeah, that was the end of my event there. For Rachel's sake, I will just say I went 2-2 and complained and said I wanted to go home. Everyone else was like 4-0, but I complained and said I wanted to go home, and so they all dropped with me, and we all left. That's the narrative we're gonna go with. So we left. Cause yeah, it was like a 3.5 hour drive, so we just went to go get food, had a great time at dinner, and then just got home and relaxed. Then the following week, we had another ProQuest at, that I didn't mention, that event was 48, I believe. I think it was 48 players. Then the following week, we had a 24-player event, and yeah, so that event, I started out round 1 against Rachel. That game was terrifying. I don't remember who went first, but it was just a full-on race. I think we were both like around 10 on turn 3. I shot a bunch of damage. She went for a big high octane turn. I shot a bunch of damage. She went for another big high octane turn. And it got down reasonably close. I think I was able to close it out with like a knock the death whistle while on 1 and got the dominate through, but I think we both had some sequencing errors in that game. It was first game of the day. A little annoyed that we got paired round 1, but I did end up getting there. barely. Definitely my closest game of the day. Man, my camera keeps freezing. Even though you guys, again, you probably don't care that much about seeing me sleep. Yeah, it was friendly fire, but to be fair, had like 10 friends in the 24 or something, so there's gonna be friendly fire. That's just kind of how that goes. Round 2, I played against an Icelander, which actually got one of my more entertaining interactions of the weekend. He got me with a Channel the Bleak Expanse when I used Death Dealer, and then I got to fire Rabble for 5. So don't even run Gorg Tome, got to Rebel for 5. That was kind of the entertaining one, but he just wasn't able to line up enough Channel Lake Frigids, and the aggression that I had just was a little too much for him to deal with. I think I ended the game on like 17, but because of Icelander's reach, really isn't 17. It never is. Yeah, so I started out there 2-0. Round 3, I got to play against Arjun again. Arjun was the dash I lost to in top 4 at min-max, and this time I knew to board out D-reacts and go much more aggressive. And in this game, my hands lined up really well. I ran a train on him. Granted, he was in the process of setting up items and trying to block, but I think he had like 4 or 5 items in play by the end, but I ended the game on 28 health. He ended up just taking way too much damage trying to set up, and then was never actually able to hold enough cards to fire arrows. By the time his items were in play, he was just trying to stay alive. I would have wished that happened at min-max, but it happens. Hey, I'm glad it's helped. I'm just playing Azalea and trying to spread or share what information I've figured out. And it means a lot when people let me know that it's helping them. What was my next round? My next round was Kano. That was against Richard. He was the one who ended up winning the Min-Max ProQuest. He won on Icelander the previous week, and so he said he wanted to play Kano this week. Kano matchup is terrifying, but I was able to line up some really good Seek and Destroys that disrupted his arsenal just enough, and then I was able to... I think I got him down to 1 after drill shotting his Tunic, and then I just bolt and shot for 4 Dominate with like 5 resources to spare, and made him go for it. And he actually almost got there because he high rolled a bunch of stuff off the top, but he ended up being like 1 resource short of killing me. But a very, very close game, but I didn't end up getting there. Round 5, I played against a Bravo, my friend Marcus. We were locked 1st and 2nd seed as the only 2 undefeateds, so we could have drawn and gotten food, but we were going to get a food break anyways, so we just played it out for fun, and I ended up winning. Then into top 8, I played against Dorinthia. I really like the Dorinthia matchup. It's very dynamic, where sometimes it's like a race, sometimes you're risking getting fatigued, and you don't really know where the game is going. But this game started out very, very fast-paced. We were kind of racing early on, which then, if we're I'd love to trade health early with Dorinthia, because that means that I don't have to think about fatigue for like the rest of the game. So if we can trade 20 damage for 20 damage across the first 3 turns, I will take that trade every day, because then like I said, I no longer have to worry about fatigue for the rest of the game, and I get to just be efficient and not have to worry about like my pitch stack and all that. And that's what happened. I think it got down to like my 6, I think I was at 17 to his 11 or something, and he had like a counter on Dawnblade going into his turn. So still reasonably close, but not having to worry about how I'm allocating each of my threats just makes the game a lot simpler. And then I was able to close out the game from that point. My top 4 against Phi was a painful experience. Um, I was higher seed, obviously, as first seed, and I chose for him to go first. He fired 17 damage on turn 0 using all 4 cards and skipping the arsenal, which I think makes sense when I blocked with all 4 cards on the first string of attacks, and then he ended on the lava burst. So I ended up taking 7 because I could only block 10. And then I drew back up, and I drew something like Yellow Read the Glide Path, Deadeye, That All You Got, and some other garbage. And a Rain Razors. And unfortunately, we don't have a quiver yet. We don't have, or I don't have any way of fixing that because I didn't have an arsenal. So my turn was unfortunately pitch the Rain Razors for Death Dealer just to get it out of my hand, and then Arsenal pass. And obviously from that point he ended up coming in for another bunch of damage, and I think I went down to 22 to hold a few, I think 3 cards. And I don't know, I came in for like 9 or 10 and got an arsenal, but at that point I was down like 18 health. Or no, I was down like 10 to 12 health after he took the damage, and just completely on the back foot for the rest of the game. I tried to claw back into it, but the early deficit was just a bit too much. Hey, welcome to Fab. Really glad you've enjoyed it. It's good to hear that you were able to learn something from it as a newer player. I know a lot of times my analysis can be a bit more in-depth than, or not as digestible for newer players, which I'm trying to work on a bit, but I'm glad you were able to get something out of it. But yeah, so I ended up losing to Phi, and we stayed for the finals. It was the Kano Phi. Phi ended up winning, and then he opened a gold foil bullseye bracers, and that was a rough event for me. Like I said, I was first seed, and I played well through top 8, or through my top 8 game, and then top 4 to just have it just kind of end on my first turn when I didn't have an arrow was, I don't know, frustrating, because like I said, I had put in like months of testing, specifically a ton in the last few weeks leading up to ProQuest season, and then just my decision points didn't matter that game. And that was, yeah, just kind of frustrating. And then obviously seeing that the gold foil would have been bullseye bracers was icing on the cake. But it is what it is. That was the gift of Games ProQuest. Yeah, and then the next weekend was Nerd Rage. As many of you know, I know I mention it a lot, but ends up whenever it's applicable, but as many of you know, I have a circadian rhythm disorder. So my sleep schedule shifts, and I had known going into ProQuest season that the final week of ProQuest season was going to be real bad for my sleep. I was planning on going to bed right around like an hour before the Nerd Rage ProQuest started. So I was just going to be asleep. Like, I was going to be half awake for the event. And I knew that going in, so I didn't have high expectations. I was just going to play because friends were there and I wanted to play. So I stayed up for it, get your extra caffeine and try and play through it. But my round 1 was against Phi. Was able to beat the Phi reasonably comfortably. Like I said, I think the matchup is pretty good. Not as good as it could be. It's still scary, but I was able to get there against the Phi round 1. My round 2 was against a Viserai, and this is where the game got kind of weird. My Viserai opponent presented Reaping Blade, instead of Rosetta Thorn. And I'm putting in Sigil of Solace, and I'm putting in That All You Got against Viserai. And so I'm not actually convinced it's that good, but it kind of caught me by surprise. There was a time where I had to like pitch away a Sigil of Solace because I couldn't heal off of it. All of my That All You Gots that I drew didn't have targets with 2 or less power, so I never actually got to draw off them. And so the game was a bit back and forth. Oh, there was also a couple decision points where I had the option of either getting an extra opt off of Crosswrap or having the Remorseless effect active. And I said, hey, I don't need the Remorseless effect here. I'm playing against a Viserai, so I'm just going to try and find a Dominate. Let me finish the story, and then I'll get back to your question, Ashen Wings. I was debating between Remorseless effect or the chance of a Dominate, and against a Viserai, I said turning off D-Reacts from Arsenal is not relevant. So it ended up just being a Remorseless for 11 with the Seek and Destroy on it, and turns out that the card in his arsenal was his one of Red Unmovable that he played. So yeah, he got to play the one of Red Unmovable and a 3-block in order to stop my Remorseless because of that decision point. I still think the decision point was correct. It just obviously got punished very hard. So that was one. There was another turn where I had to face tank a bunch of damage in order to go for a turn where I got to opt like 3 times, or opt twice into Blind Azalea to try to find an arrow, and I missed on all 3. And it's like, okay, so we've got a couple of bad variance points that happens. Then I got down to the end where I'm on 7, I believe, and he comes in, he's got like a full grip, and he goes, make a Rune Chant, I think is how it started. Rune Chant into Sonata. No, not Sonata. Into Revel. Or maybe it was a Sonata into a Revel. Either way, Revel's, or not Revel. What's the card? Swarming Gloomveil. It's a Swarming Gloomveil coming in for 3 with Go Again. And I have an all red hand, and I'm on 7. And he's already seen 2 Revel and Runebloods. And I go, well, he's on 3 at this point, but I don't think I can beat the last Revel. Yeah, I think it was a Sonata is what he led with. I said, yeah, I can't beat the last Revel. If he has the 3rd one, I'm going to lose. And unfortunately he did. So it was Creepers in the Revel, bumps Sonata up to, or bumps Swarming up to 4. Makes a ton of Rune Chants. It hits because I only blocked 3. And it made it so I couldn't block Arcane. And so he just swings the Thorn, and all the Rune Chants in the Thorn Arcane are unblockable, and I lost the game. So it's a very good matchup for me, but obviously even good matchup doesn't mean unlosable. So did drop the game to Viserai, but it happens. My next round was against a Phi. And again, I was able to get there. That game was actually really, really close. He had some nasty Art of War turns, but I was able to get there in the end. I think that game was won off of some missequencing by my opponent or poor decision points. I don't think I should have won that game had draws happened the same way and had he played it perfectly. But there's always kind of a learning curve playing against Azalea, and he may not have known the correct lines against me. But I did end up beating the Phi there. Then my round 4 was a Dromai. And yeah, it was another one where the Dromai just drew very well. And I tried to get there, and I just couldn't quite do it. I never shuffled my deck, and I got down to my 2nd cycle because I was stuck clearing dragons instead of hitting him. And I think I had 5 cards before my 2nd cycle. I didn't know the exact number, but I knew I was very close, and I hadn't seen my 3rd popper. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to draw up and I'm going to find my popper. And I drew up and I drew all 3 of my E-strikes and something else. And I'm like, wait, there should be a popper here. And apparently I had 1 more card left in the deck before my second cycle, and that was my final popper that I really needed to be able to stop that turn. I don't think it would have changed anything. I think that game was very rough, as like I said, I couldn't find E-strikes, and his board was just kind of out of control. But I just thought it was kind of funny, thinking that I was going to draw my popper, and it was 1 away. At that point, I was 2-2, but I had already stayed up to play, so I decided to just keep playing. I got another Dromai, and I was able to beat the Dromai. Same game plan of clearing dragons, going face, and yeah, clearing dragons, going face, and killing my opponent. Just enough tall dominate, did disruption, was able to get me there. Still always a close game, but was able to get it. Alright, yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate the feedback, but I'm glad you've been able to get something out of it for sure. And then, yeah, back to the question on Reaping Blade into Fatigue Oldham. We had this conversation, or I had this conversation with some friends earlier today. It's a bit weird where the issue is that the Oldham isn't really hitting you. So Reaping Blade in like Briar, I don't think really does much because the Oldham isn't hitting you. Unless there's a way for you to set up a second cycle without actually attacking them. Or so that whenever they attack you, it keeps turning off healing and you can kind of walk the health totals down. It's an interesting concept, but I'm not sure how good it actually is in practice. In Viserai, there's also the consideration of if there's a way to fit in like an OTK package for Fatigue Oldham, where you can start building stuff up and make him become the aggressor. It doesn't even have to be the most efficient fatigue package. Or sorry, it doesn't have to be the most efficient package, as long as you can just set up like the 40-something rune chance to kill him. But it's an interesting kind of concept to explore there, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I haven't gotten a chance to test any of it. But yeah, so I ended up finishing that event 3-2, which not as good as I was hoping, but it is what it is. And then, of course, with my... It's not luck, but it's with my kind of story arc, the gold foil for that event ended up being a Death Dealer. So that one was another kind of funny one. Granted, it didn't bother me quite as much as the previous because I wasn't planning on doing well at that event anyways. This final event was, like I said, I was half asleep, so I didn't expect to do anything. So not winning the Death Dealer wasn't like a disappointment. Yeah, so that was the ProQuest season. I believe I ended up, I don't remember the number. It was something like 17-7. Yeah, 17-7 sounds about right. Actually, I can just tally it up. I have it on screen. Yeah, 17-7, which not quite as good as I'd like, but still a pretty decent showing for Azalea. I was a little bit bummed that no one else was able to get the Living Legend points. I know we had quite a few people who got close, and it was just not quite there. Man, my overhead camera keeps freezing very frequently. It's getting a little bit old. Come on. But yeah, it was a little disappointing that no one was able to get the Living Legend points, but it is what it is. So yeah, then we had kind of last minute prep for Indy. Ah, that's where it is. While I was sleeving this, I couldn't find where my last battering bolt went. Come on, camera. It was stuck in between my equipment. Yeah, I was really hoping an Azalea would or Azalea could get living legend points, and even on like the first weekend, we had a bunch of people getting, you know, top 4s, top 8s, but no one was quite able to get it. And so it looks like we're likely going to go into Outsiders without Azalea ever getting living legend points prior to it, which is disappointing. Like I said, that was kind of what I was aiming for going into this ProQuest season, is I wanted to try and help people improve on the deck and, you know, be able to have it get the first points. But oh well, such is life. Yeah, and then prep for Indy. I did end up changing a few cards after the banned and restricted. I went ahead and removed Memorial Ground from the deck entirely. The kind of reason or logic behind that was that Oldham was going to be either playing a heavy fatigue or just not play. Like, people would play other decks. And I think that was a common thought process for people going into the calling. Ended up not being quite as accurate as I hoped, but still reasonably accurate. But yeah, losing 2 Memorial Grounds that I had in previously really hurts the matchup. But I was able to fit in hamstring shots, and I think it was basically just hamstring shots. And then I moved around a couple of other arrows to be more focused on disruption into aggro and less focused on damage into like Icelander and Oldham. All of my deck lists have been posted a bunch of times in the Azalea chat. I may get my deck lists posted in the description here at some point, but no promises. And yes, I'm resleeving my second Azalea deck. The one I just finished resleeving was my non-foil deck that I played at the calling, just because my foils are getting curled and needed to be put in inner sleeves again in order to uncurl. So yeah, this is the deck I would normally play with, but I did not want to get in trouble for marked cards at Indy, so I had to throw together the non-foil version. Yeah. You can just see they're curled. And it's funny, like, Everfest foils curl this way, and I think the original, like, Arcane Rising and Welcome to Wraith foils curl that way. So it's rather noticeable which, like, what cards things are. So definitely was not able to play these foils in the calling. But yeah, those were the last minute changes I made going into the calling, and I guess we'll just jump into how that event, or actually no, I'll quickly cover my side events, because I got in reasonably early on Friday and went ahead and played some side events. So there was a constructed event on Friday at 2 p.m. for 3 rounds. I started out against an Oldham, and I should have lost this game, but we got down to the very end. My last dominated Remorseless, I think it was for 7. He was on 3. No, he was on 4. Yeah, he was on 4. And he still had his Tunic. So I drill shotted his Rampart, and then I hit a dominated Remorseless, put him to 1, and my only attack left in the deck was a blue Bolt and Shot. So I'm like, oh, I guess I lose. I obviously didn't say that. I just continued on with my life. I had 3 cards, 2, 3. I think it was a knock at that all you got and a blue Bolt and Shot, and he's on 1. And I'm like, dang. I hit him with the Remorseless. Just Arsenal. No, I didn't Arsenal because there's no reason to Arsenal at that point. And he goes, yep, and goes E-Strike for 7. I block with my knock and my that all you got, and then go to use my Tunic to like load the Bolt and Shot. I just kind of going through the motions at this point, and a judge reaches over and goes, the Oldham just lost. And we're both like, wait, what? And then we realized I had hit him with the Remorseless, and he played an Enlightened Strike and lost a life. So that was a game I should not have won, but I did technically win. So it got reported as a win. And yeah, that was kind of the strangest win I ever had. I've had it happen on Talishar, but never in paper. Because normally I'm like, no, don't play that card because you'll lose. But I had completely forgotten. In my head, it was like, game was over. Hey, Jonathan, how's it going? You were my Bravo opponent in round 1 of the calling, right? Unless it's a different Jonathan Parker. I'll be getting to that in a minute. How's it going? Glad you stopped by. Yes, that was round 1 of the side event. Round 2, I played against a Phi, I think? Actually, don't remember right off. Either way, I ended up winning that. And my round 3... Oh man, actually these side events I don't remember very well. I know I went 3-0 in that first event. I just don't remember what my matchups were. I think it was a Dory round 2, maybe? I know I played a Dory. I know I played 2 Phis. I played Dory, 2 Phis, a Dromai, the Oldham, Alexi. Am I missing one deck? I'm missing one. Either way, 3-0'd that event. I guess, yeah, no, the Dory matchup was reasonably close. I think, yeah. The Dory matchup was weird because we ended up racing a bunch early because I didn't draw any of my D-reacts, and then I finally drew them at the end to clear his counters. That's awesome. I hope you enjoy Azalea. I've got a bunch of content on this channel about it, and Discord is the best way to reach me. If you ever have any questions about the deck, I'm always open to talking about it. Shoot, there's like a little speck in there. But yeah, Azalea is my favorite deck to play in the game. It's very fun. So yeah, that was the Dory game. The first Phi game, I think I stumbled a couple times and just kind of got out aggroed. We got down to an end game. Oh, actually, no, we got down to an end game where I just needed to hold like 1 card and I would be able to close it out. I think it was 1-1. Or no, 1-4. But as soon as I could get him blocking, I would be fine. And he just started getting every single card out of my hand every turn. And I'm like, man, if I could draw like a That All You Got, I'd be able to block a 1 attack and then draw the card back and be able to play a turn. And so he did end up finally closing it with like a Razor Reflex, and I looked at the next 3 cards in my deck, and they were all 3 That All You Gots were in my next 4 cards. I was like, wow, those would have been helpful. On Discord, my name is I'm a Papaya, and if you're in the main Flesh and Blood Discord and take a look in the Azalea chat, I am talking there quite often. So you can scroll up slightly and you'll see me. My DMs are always open. What was I saying? Yeah, so that Phi game was super close. I just couldn't quite find like a That All You Got to hold a card. And actually, had I been 1 card further, I sank against the Razor Reflex and drew something that wasn't a D-react. And 1 more card in would have been the That All You Got, which would have stopped his turn and I would have gotten to hold cards. So, just a little unfortunate on the variance, but it happens. So that was my 1 loss, was against the Phi in round 1 of the Super Armory. Then I beat another Phi there, and then I believe it was a Dromai. Dromai game, I just kind of ran hot, and he didn't really get to play. He just took way too much damage way too fast, and was forced to block with way too many cards. And I think he did end up having like 7 Ashwings in play, but by that point, it was block with 4 cards or die every turn. After that, was the Lexi. So I ended up fatiguing the Lexi, which, for those of you who've been following my content, has become one of my kind of more weird game plans. But into Ice Lexi, it's felt like the best game plan. And yeah, it sounds very weird for Azalea to fatigue anything, but it's felt like the best game plan because Lexi doesn't really let you hold a lot of cards. She does very well into aggro decks that are card hungry and decks that don't have armor. So the game plan is just block. Whenever she gives you space to play cards, that's when you disrupt her. But most of the time it's just block, D-reacts, sigils, and when she gives you space, like Tunic, Fire, and Arrow. And that's what I did this game, and I was able to slow her down just enough to where by the time they got to like second cycle, it was just, the deck was a little too weak, gave me space to crack back, and yeah, we were able to get there. So on the very first day of the calling Indy, I ended up 6-1 inside events. Arguably 5-2 because that game against the Oldham should not have counted, but Jem says it was 6-1, so we'll take that. Yeah, and then the next day was the calling. I was asked to be on stream round 1 because whenever it's an Azalea that you want on stream, you got to get them early because there's no guarantee on how the event's going to go. I could hit Dromize and just immediately be in a bad record to where it wouldn't be a great stream game to put like a 1-2 on stream. So that's where Jonathan and I got put on stream, and unfortunately Jonathan did not have experience in the matchup. He pretty new to the game, new to Flesh and Blood, not new to card games, but new to Flesh and Blood from what I remember. And so there was a lot of inexperience in the matchup where there were points where cards should have been blocked with or not. There are just a few different sequencing issues that ended up kind of snowballing kind of the game out of control to where I got super far ahead and he just wasn't able to disrupt me enough at that point. So that game was streamed over on Mansant's channel. And yeah, so that started out 1-0. I then had a very strange, or I'm going to go with sad round 2, where, well, I guess I go over the table, and I sit down and see that I'm sitting right next to Michael Hamilton. Yeah, that is tough because I think the Azalea Bravo matchup is a very skill-intensive matchup, or matchup experience, or not, what's the word? It's a matchup where experience is very important, and the person who's more experienced in the matchup is going to get there because it's a battle of inches. And yeah, it's just a bit of an unfortunate pairing. Also, how did you end up finishing that day 1 of the calling, Jonathan? And how did the rest of your event go? Hopefully you had a good time. But yeah, so my round 2, I was paired and sitting right next to Michael Hamilton. And I get paired into a Levia. I win the die roll and go second, and throw my entire hand in front of the turn 0, and get to play a Sigil, go up to like 42, or 43. Feels really good start. And then I draw back up, and I immediately have flashbacks to my ProQuest at Gift of Games, because I drew up and drew no arrows, and I go, oh man, not again. Like I said that out loud. And, you know, I'm sure Michael Hamilton heard it. And so the game kind of progresses where I'm on the back foot. My opponent has some really good Levia turns. It wasn't anything crazy. Like, he definitely didn't high roll, but he was able to keep clearing his blood debt, and I was just on the back foot needing to block out for most of the game. And so I'm playing defensive, just blocking a ton, trying to live, hoping he misses and dies. And, you know, Michael finishes his game and kind of looks over, and then then Roger comes over, and at that point I'm losing the game to Levia. So got to watch the Azalea lose to Levia, and Michael looks over, and he's just out of curiosity, and then Roger comes over, and Roger says to me, he's like, "You stop playing Icelander for Azalea?" As I'm losing to a Levia, and it's a funny story now, but it was rather embarrassing at the time. Not gonna lie. So yeah, that was my round 2. I lost to the Levia there. And it was in front of Michael Hamilton and Roger Bodie. So, great start to the day. 3 drop, but a good time. Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing I noticed when we played our games is when you were playing your showtimes, you were or rather, there were multiple turns where you were ending and only drawing up 3 cards. And in Flesh and Blood, unlike a lot of card games, it's very important to try and use all of the cards as efficiently as possible. Even if it's a card like, hey, I'd like this later, just use it, whether it's blocking, whether it's playing it, use cards and make sure that you draw 4 every turn. That's going to go a long way as far as efficiency. Because I know there were a couple of times where you were only drawing 3 at the end of your turn, or only drawing 2 or something. And that kind of loses you a bunch of value, and you're going to watch your health total drop quite quickly if you keep doing that. I think that was the biggest thing I noticed when we played. Yeah, so that was my round 2. I was 1-1 at this point. My round 3 was against a Dash. As I'd mentioned previously, into Dash, I've now realized that I want to take out my D-Reacts and plan on being super aggressive. So I sit down against the Dash, and he starts Pounder with Pistol against me. And he goes first, and it's something ridiculous, like Zipper Hit for 7 into something else, into Spark for a second, or no, Spark for a core, into a draw an Arsenal. And it ended up being that he drew a red combustible off of the Spark. And my camera keeps freezing. I know I keep saying it, and it probably doesn't matter too much, but it is what it is. Yeah, so did I leak any damage? I don't remember. Either way, I think I did leak 1 damage on I leaked 1 on the Zipper Hit. But then I had a very underwhelming drawback, or hand that I drew back up. And it didn't do much of anything. I didn't do any damage. I think I was only able to attack for 5 or something, and he just put like Teklo Heart plus a card in front. And then immediately goes like Teklo Core Pop into Goliath Gauntlet, into Red Combustible with the what's it called? Card Pounder. So I had to give him 3 cards there. And then went into a bunch more damage, into a high octane turn on the next turn, into a high octane turn on the next turn. And next thing I know, it's 40-22. And I'm like, shoot, I went into this game on the game plan of racing, and I've blocked with 2 of my red in the ledgers. And it's 40-22, but he's boosted a max velocity and blocked with a max velocity. So at that point, I pivoted into Fatigue. Even though I have a bunch of 2 blocks and non-blocks and no D-Reacts in the deck, I'm like, screw it, we're going Fatigue. And I was able to hold enough cards to just barely disrupt him and just barely block out. And he was apparently only was on 2 max velocities, because I thought I was dead when he got to 2nd cycle, if he could just line up a max velocity turn. But he ended up only being on 2, and he boosted away a Chamber. But it was razor thin margins on that game, but I was able to fatigue him because I think he used Heart a couple too many times when he probably should have noticed that I was trying to block him out. And yeah, so I did end up getting there from a massive health deficit. But yeah, it was a very scary game. My round 4 was against a Rhinar. I lost the die roll and he went first. And luckily he didn't have any crazy turns. Yeah, very different to other card games. Yeah. Another card game, I mean, and that's just a result of drawing to 4 instead of drawing 1. So anything that you don't use is essentially wasted in this game. I'm glad it was a good experience. I know I say it a lot on the channel here, but my first priority is always going to be to better the community. And anytime I sit down across from an opponent, I want to walk away from the table with them being better off than when we sat down. I mean, obviously I can't do that perfectly if they're upset by how a game went, but I never want to be like a negative interaction for people. Ideally a positive, but at the very least neutral. That's the first goal. Second goal is doing well in events. So if I can do both, that's great. But this community has been great so far, and I want to do everything I can to continue it. What was next? Next after that was... the Rhinar. He went first, nothing crazy. And the Rhinar matchup is a very fun mid-range matchup as long as neither player high rolls turn 0. Past that point, it becomes like a very interesting back and forth. I think Azalea is reasonably favored because we just have better turn over turn than Rhinar. As long as their blood rushes aren't crazy. He did have a 20 damage blood rush, but I was still able to get there. Oh, yeah, no, that game was strange. So I'm just remembering back to it. We started out, I think it was like 5 or 6 turns in, and it was still like 35 to 35 because it was just a ton of block with 2 cards, swing with 2 cards, block 2 cards, swing 2 cards, both players. And so I'm getting scared. I'm like, uh-oh, I'm burning through cards to maintain this mid-range game plan, and all of a sudden I'm not actually progressing the game. So now, I got to worry about fatigue. I got to worry about how each of these cards is being used. He's playing Sigil of Solace. He's also playing Oasis for Spite and D-Reacts. I'm like, uh-oh. This is scary. And then all of a sudden I come in for like, a 12 damage turn and he goes no blocks. Like, okay. That's what I like to hear. He comes back with a 20 damage blood rush turn, but my hand's great, and also he intimidates stuff. I'm like, all right, well, no blocks. I went down to like 15. Then I came back with like a 17 damage turn, and he takes most of it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, sweet. I don't have to worry about fatigue anymore. And then we kind of went back to our mid-range block and swing and block and swing. But just that exchange of both taking like 20 just makes the game state so much easier for me. Because I have to be more worried about fatigue than he does. And then it gets down into the late game where we both kind of have that reach of evasive damage, either with intimidates or dominates, and I was able to finally close it out there. I actually don't remember if I closed it out by going wide or by going tall with dominate, but I did end up finishing off the game. And I think I stayed on 3 just to stay out of range of Reckless. Then my next round was against a Dash again. However, this was a very different Dash. He flipped over his equipment and I went, uh-oh. Because it was... what's the card? Crown of... No. Arcanite Skullcap. That's how long it's been since I've played against the Skullcap. I couldn't even remember what the card was called. Yeah, it was an Arcanite Skullcap. And Tunic, and I'm like, okay. I immediately know that he's playing Tree Frog Dash, which is tons of D-Reacts, a bunch of healing, block out. Game plan is block, block until your opponent runs out of cards, and you can kill them with pistols. So that is one nice thing about having a lot of game knowledge on what other decks are running is you can sit down from an opponent, and as soon as they flip over your equipment, you know what the rest of their deck looks like and how the game needs to play out. So immediately I'm going, okay, I need to make sure to set up wide turns. I need to set up dominate turns in order to push damage. I need to be aware that there are going to be a lot of D-reacts in Arsenal that I either need to lock down when going tall, or there's going to be, or just kind of force them out. And so I'm able to string together like a big Rain Razor's turn. I think it was like 25 damage, 23 damage, something like that. And I got him down reasonably low. Then I started pushing some dominates, and I got him down to 1. I'm like, okay, I got this. I just need to find one more big dominate. I get like an 11 dominate. And he's got like a 3-block and double Oasis Respite. Then he plays like a Sigil. And then I dominate and get him down a little bit more. Back down because he healed up a bunch. And then he's got more D-reacts and more disruption. And unfortunately, he was able to just barely stay alive and get through that game. But I got it super close. I guess kind of what happened in the mid game was I pitched a Rain Razors relatively early. No, it was probably like a third of the way through the game. Actually, I opted it to the bottom. I didn't pitch it, which is actually important because that means I know where it is and he doesn't. And at that point, I'm like, okay, I'll wait until it comes back around. It got about halfway through the deck again, at which point I had to play Knock the Death Whistle, which shuffled my deck, and then I didn't know where it was anymore. But it was my last Rain Razors, and I still had my Snapdragons, and I didn't have Bracers, which meant in order to have a big Rain Razors turn, I needed to start my turn with an Arsenaled Arrow, fire the arrow, Rain Razors, snaps, and then continue from there. The problem is arsenaling an arrow is not ideal most of the time, unless you're going for that very specific line. And the other issue was I didn't know where my Rain Razors was anymore because I just shuffled my deck. So for that back half of that game, I was just trying to arsenal arrows to set up for that turn because you have to arsenal before knowing if you're going to draw the Rain Razors. So I'm trying to set up for that turn going, okay, I'm going to pop off as soon as I draw this Rain Razors. And it just never showed up. And I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, I had a turn where I couldn't clear my arrow from Arsenal. So I had to burn my snaps to make sure to keep up pressure. Because at this point, he's got all of his items in play. Which means if I don't attack and make him block, he's just going to shoot me for like 15. And I can only take that so many times. I think I was on 25 at this point. So I'm like, whatever. I'm going to use my snaps. I have to. This Rain Razors hasn't showed up. And then it didn't show up for a few more turns. And then finally it ended up being almost near the bottom of bottom after shuffling. So it just took a while to get there. And so I wasn't quite able to put together enough damage to get there. I think if that Rain Razor showed up a little bit sooner, I might have been able to get there, but it's definitely a challenging matchup. So at that point, I am now 3-2. It is obviously not where you want to be in a 500-person calling, but that is what it is. Next round, I played against a Briar, notably Wesley Dong. He top-8'd Worlds. I believe he was playing Ultimate Worlds, but yeah, so played against the Briar. I went second, which is always what I'm going to choose into aggro. And he didn't have anything crazy early on. We traded a bit of damage. He played a Channel Mount Heroic, and I ended up cracking back for like a bunch. I think I fired I think I took it a little bit slower to make sure I could arsenal a D-react. So I only threatened like 17 or something to put him low, but he just had a bad draw after the Channel Mount Heroic. So he ended up just needing to block out, and at that point I had the tempo. He was low enough to where he didn't have enough equipment or health to just face tank a turn and have a big crackback. He had to be blocking every turn, which just is really difficult once Briar gets into that game state. So It was a very quick back and forth, but I did end up getting there. I guess I actually do have all my health totals written down. These inners occasionally do not like going in. Where is it? Huh. Thought I had my notepad nearby. Oh well. I don't think that game was very close as far as health was concerned. I think I ended up being on like 8 or 9 still, which is not too close. His draws just didn't quite line up how they needed to. And then my round 7 winning in for day 2 was against a Dromai, which I was not happy about. And that's something I wasn't. I was vocally unhappy. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was like, oh, it has to be a Dromai for my winning in, of course. But it's just not what I should be doing. Like, there's no need for that. I was just frustrated in the moment said that. Obviously, that was all that was said, but I don't know. Still don't feel good about doing that. Especially because I ended up winning that game. It was a very, very close game, but he just wasn't able to stick any big dragons, and I was able to clean up the dragons as they showed up without losing too much pressure. And it got down to super low health. He went to 3. I dominated like a Remorseless for 10, and he had the double Sigil of Solace to live through it. But at that point, he was just too low to where he couldn't efficiently block out everything. And then he started swinging an Asvali, which I then started having to give like 2 cards to each Asvali to stay alive. It was like 1-1. It was very, very close game, but did end up edging out the win over the Dromai. But I do feel bad about complaining about the matchup, and then ended up winning. It's just bad form. Yeah. There's no need for me to complain about it. Something I'm working on. It's just Dromai had been my most common matchup across the entire ProQuest season, so it was getting a little bit old. But here we are. So I did end up winning that. I went 5-2 on day 1, and so going into day 2, it's never a great situation being 5-2 or X2, because that means you have to win out day 2. Technically still live for top 8, but it's just technical. Probably not going to. Some people do, but especially playing Azalea with all the Oldhams in the field, I was not planning on top 8ing. We'll go with that. So my first opponent on day 2, Michael, I can never pronounce his last name, Jazzker? There's a bunch of C's and Z's and S's and stuff. Either way, very, very good Oldham player. He ended up top 8ing the event because he was one of those people who went 5-0 on day 2. The problem was I had played against him previously in Columbus. He was my round 6 loss at the Columbus Battle Hardened, I believe. And he learned from our last game. And what he learned was attacking is a waste of time. So the entire game at the calling today, or not today, on Sunday, was he just blocked biggest number possible. And by the end of the game, it was not even close. And the game could have been closer. However, there was just a few variance points where it's like I came in with like a Remorseless for 10 dominate, and he just happened to have, or no, for like 12, 13 dominate, something like that. He had just drawn one of the red staunches, so he's able to block it entirely and not leak any damage. And it felt like he kind of had the answer every time. And the matchup is very bad, which means I need him to like never have the answer, but he had it every time. So yeah, I think I had like 15 cards in deck and he was on 28. And so at that point, I'm just shooting the shit with him. I know the game is over. I don't want to just concede, or I should have just conceded, but I was just playing for fun and just joking around, having a good time, because he knows he can't lose. I know I can't win, so I'm just playing cards. And then kind of the the weirdest thing happened. I've never actually done this before, but I was paying so little attention to the game that he swings Titan's Fist for 4, and I block with a Fate Foreseen, and then I opt to the top of my deck, and I go into autopilot. I'm used to opting after crosswrap, or opting on crosswrap. And so I then resolve my Fate Foreseen, activate Azalea, put my card from my arsenal to the bottom, move the top card into the arsenal face up, and then go attack with it. And he just looks at me, and I look down and realize I'm still defending his Titan's Fist attack. So I'm like, yeah, let's just end there. And so yeah, I conceded there. Needless to say, not my finest moment, but I had a good time regardless, even though, like I said, it wasn't even a close game. It was kind of a funny little interaction there. Yeah, slightly embarrassing, but entertaining nonetheless. So yeah, at this point I am 5-3, which is obviously dead for top 8, playing for top 32, and also playing for ELO. I've been able to maintain a reasonably high ELO, so doing well at these events had the potential to push me into top 50. So I wanted to continue to play. My next round was against Michael Fang on Briar, another player that I've played against. Actually, I played against at Battle Hardened Columbus, but he was on Oldham at the time. And so he started out with like Nimblism, Exude for 10, which I threw my entire hand in front of to make sure he didn't get the embodiment, and then he pitched a blue to make a rune chant, and I basically started at 35, because I had to take all of the damage there. But past that point, I was able to just pressure him. He never drew a Channel Mount Heroic, and when Briar doesn't draw Channel Mount Heroic, I'm able to out-aggro them. And my disruption was just a little bit too much for Briar to deal with. Reasonably back and forth game, but never really felt out of my reach that game. His hands just didn't line up how they needed to in order for him to win that game, and my hands were quite good at that game. So that was my round 9. Then round 10, I faced my very first Phi of the event, which was very strange, because my buddy James, I think, had already played like 4 Phis or something at that point. But either way, very first Phi, and the game kind of did not go well for my opponent. He sat down and he had mentioned, like, I don't know, his Art of Wars just weren't lining up like the entire event. He's like, they just haven't been good. I was like, oh, yeah, I don't know, that happens. And then he played his very first Art of War against me and drew into double Sync Below. And so his Art of War turn that he had taken a bunch of damage to do was like, he fired back like 10 and arsenaled. So, yeah. And then I think he had another Art of War, which was not great. But in order to play that second Art of War, he took a hamstring shot for 17 and said no blocks. So I think that is my biggest single health change playing Flesh and Blood. I mean, unless you want to count like Icelander combos with like Frost Hexes, which are technically instances of 1. But I think the single instance of damage, or highest single instance of damage that I've seen, hamstring for 17. And that hamstring ended up actually preventing a CNC at the end of his Art of War turn, so that was quite nice. But yeah, his Art of War turns just weren't big enough. Hey Templar, how's it going? Thanks. Yeah, I'm just talking through the events that I played, and I'm coming up on the end of Calling Indie. Yeah, so that was round 10 against the Phi. Just a bit of unfortunate draws for my opponent, and my disruption just kind of lined up how it needed to. Then I played against Alexi, my teammate Easton Douglas, and it was actually really funny because going into the event, yeah, 3 of a kind and no arrows, it gets old, but it happens. I played against Easton on Lexi, and actually, yeah, it was going into day 2. I had mentioned, like, hey, I would like to test the Azalea Lexi matchup because I've been fatiguing Lexis, but I don't know if that's actually a viable strategy because in my head it shouldn't be, but it's been working. So yeah, we should jam some games and test. And he's like, yeah, we'll do that sometime. Lo and behold, 4 rounds later, we end up getting paired, and it was actually it was disappointing because we were both live for top 32, obviously, but one of us was getting knocked out of top 32 potential there. And I mean, I always put the positive spin on this guarantees that one of us is still live for top 32. We can't both lose, but it is always a bummer having to play against a teammate. Yeah, congrats. How large was or did you make it any further than top 8, like top 4, or finals, or was it just the top 8? But either way, congrats. It's always a big accomplishment to have your first top 8. Hey Pankaj. Into Lexi, I'm currently boarding 65. And I believe the 9 cards that are coming out are Rain Razors, Take Aim, and Release the Tension. 3 copies of each. And then Snapdragons. Whoa, chat's popping off all of a sudden. Jonathan, yes, my Azalea list is posted probably in the Azalea chat. If you just go in the Discord and search from my username and has a link, you'll find it pretty quickly. You can also check the tournaments on February that will have from the indie tournament. My list should be on there as well. Hey, the pitch stack, how's it going? And what was I saying? Oh yeah, so my game against Easton. So I had told him going into this that my goal is to fatigue Lexi, and he was aware of that game plan. So we sit down, and obviously my first question is, how many cards did you present? And he tells me 60. So I'm like, okay. Just 60? I told you I was going to try and fatigue you, but all right. Challenge accepted, apparently. And he starts out with, he actually plays an Art of War on turn 1 just to get an ice card so he could play out a Channel Lake Frigid and Red Arctic Incarceration and set up his arsenal, which was interesting. I think it was good, but I ended up having like a blue and a yellow in hand, so I was able to play through it. But that was his first Art of War gone. And I think he also banished like a Heat Seeker, so it was nice to see a red arrow and an Art of War gone on turn 0 for no actual damage. But I end up having to pay 5 for a Death Dealer activation, and then another 2 to fire an arrow. So I ended up paying 7 resources. I think it was 2 yellows and a blue in order to attack for 5. So that was kind of brutal, but the main takeaway was I got to fire an arrow that is potentially disruptive, because against Lexi, if they arsenal an arrow and you sleep dart, they can't afford to let it hit, because then they can't flip it and play out of the second arsenal slot because they have no hero text. Lost in top 8 to 5, didn't draw a single ice card until turn 4 and drew 1. Yeah. Yeah, that happens in those aggressive matchups. It can be a bit of variance as to how the game goes, and bad draws or good draws kind of get you there a lot of times. But yeah, so into Easton, it was kind of a back and forth. I'm just trying to block. That first Channel Lake Frigid was really awkward because he ended up swinging back, and I think I had like a Sigil plus a Sink Below in hand and all reds, and he like flipped an ice card because he blocked my Sleep Dart, something like that. So I end up like blocking 6 and having a Sigil Sink Below in hand and a Frostbite, and so the channel goes away, and my turn ends up being pitch Sink Below to play a Sigil of Solace, pass, which it's not great. I'll tell you that much. So the game's a little bit back and forth. He plays his first 2 3 of a kinds without any other buffs, and I've noticed after that Art of War he hadn't seen any other Art of Wars or Rain Razors yet. And so I'm blocking out. I go down reasonably low, but he's also given me a few gaps to shoot some damage back. And I get some like red in the ledgers and stuff and disruption. But then we get like halfway through the game, and he still hasn't seen any Rain Razors, and he's seen 1 Art of War. And he's just arsenaled his third 3 of a kind and put it face up in his arsenal, because he took like a small turn to try and disrupt me so that he could have a smooth turn to play this 3 of a kind. And so I take the damage, and I look at my hand, and I've got a Seek and Destroy, a Knock the Death Whistle, a That All You Got, and I think a Ravenous Rabble with no arsenal. And I go, all right, well, no Rain Razors have shown up yet. Only 1 Art of War has shown up, and he's like halfway through his deck. It's like, they've got to be here soon. All of my red in the ledgers are gone. And so I go, all right, screw it. I go Knock the Death Whistle, reload, I think, the Ravenous Rebel, put a Battering Bolt on top of my deck, play Seek and Destroy, fire the Battering Bolt, and he has to read the Battering Bolt and goes, oh no. So he gets forced to pitch the Rain Razors that he had just drawn in order to defensively Art of War. I think he blocked from Arsenal and from hand for 4. He didn't even do the draw 2, because he didn't want to draw into more instants, because we both knew that they were all coming up. So he goes down to just 1 card in hand. Yeah, he goes down to 1 card in hand and the 3 of a kind in arsenal, and he's under Seek and Destroy. So it's pitch the card to play his 3rd Seek and Destroy, or sorry, not Seek and Destroy, 3 of a kind, and the only arrow he draws is a blue Chilling Ice Vein. So he gets to fire that for 4, fused, and yeah, that was his 3rd 3 of a kind gone, his first Rain Razors down to the bottom, and his 2nd Art of War gone for a 4 damage turn. So that kind of set the rest of the pace of the game to where he was trying to cobble together some big push, but he was just kind of on the back foot for the remainder of the game. And I just kept blocking. He was running out of gas, and eventually he was trying to put together his final push, but in doing so, he's giving me a ton of space, so I started just firing Disruption and making him block, and he just wasn't able to find that last push. So I think I lived on like 3 with a Tunic block left as well. So not a huge buffer, but I was able to run him out of cards. That was my round 11. Round 12, my winning in for top 32, if you can call it that, was my kind of final game for top 32 was against another Phi, my second one of the event. And this one went a little more like Phi games normally go. I had stumbled a little bit partway through the game, and he got to go Art of War into a Flame Call Awakening, into Phoenix Flame, into a 0 for 5 because of the Art of Wars, into and a Mask Trigger, or Mask of the Pouncing Lynx proc into like what's the card? Lava Burst. But it ends up being like, it wasn't actually as bad as it could have been. I think it was like 24 damage with an arsenal, which it's still 24 damage off 4 cards is pretty good. But it was definitely not quite as devastating as it could have been. But yeah, I no blocked that entire thing. My hand was like a red in the ledger turn, but I took it all because he had just taken damage to set that up. And so the health totals at that point, I think it was like 12 to 30. Yeah, 12 to 30 sounds right. And the problem was like my hand just didn't block, and if I blocked with anything, I'd just be conceding tempo for the rest of the game and still leak a ton of damage. So I went to 12 and I disrupted him for a couple turns, was able to close the health gap a little bit, but then he just started chipping away at me, and it got down to I think like my 1 to his 8, 1 to 5. No, 1 to 8 sounds right. And I ended up no. I was a little bit higher. I went down to 1 to hold 2 cards. I had a blue bolt and shot and arsenal. I had to throw I had to throw my tunic and my perch grapplers to stay at 1. And I kept a seek and destroy and a read the glide path in hand. And yeah, I think it was like 1 to 8. And I cross wrap to opt, and I find my 3rd red in the ledger on top. And I'm able to seek and destroy red in the ledger off that hand and flip the tempo of the game. Don't mind saying it. That game was lost. I should not have won that game, but I found the single out in my deck off the top. To be fair, I played to my outs, and I got rewarded for it. And I probably would have had to blind Azalea if I didn't find it. And actually, not exactly. I guess Remorseless also was a similar out, because it would have put him to 3, so he wouldn't be able to go wide. And I think I had 1 or 2. I think I had 2 of those left. So there were a few outs, but basically I had to find a Remorseless or a red in the ledger dominate, or I lost that game. But found it and put him super low, and then I dominated another attack, put him to 1, and I ended up just getting tempo back because I got lucky. And yeah, so I ended up closing out that game. So I finished 9-3, which got me 29th. So yeah, not the way I wanted to finish the day. Obviously, the win was nice, but that was not my game to win. Yeah, that's how I'll put it. That was not my game to win. But sometimes it works out. Because on the flip side, you could look at something like my Lavaya game in round 2, where I probably shouldn't have lost, but variance got the better of me. So yeah, that was my 29th place in calling Indianapolis. It was nice getting to put up a good finish on Azalea. Yeah, we take them where we can get them. It was really nice because, like I mentioned a bit earlier, I was pretty bummed after the ProQuest season. I was really hoping to win one, and then just couldn't quite close out the 2 that I top 4'd. And then 2 of the ProQuests I played in had Ranger gold foils. It was just kind of frustrating. And then I realized that this was probably going to be my last competitive event playing Azalea in her current form. And it's not to say I'm not excited about Outsiders, but I'm a little bit nervous that it'll change the deck a lot. I really, really like Death Dealer. I really, really like Skullbone and Crossstrap, and kind of the play patterns that they give you access to. and I'm a little bit afraid that all of a sudden, like, hey, Sandscour is going to be the way to play Azalea, or oh, now you need to play one cost buffs and blues are good. Like, if the list changes a bunch, it's like I'm sure it gets better, but that's not the deck that might not be the deck that I enjoy, or the deck that I'm familiar with. So, a little nervous about how it's going to change. So Indy was going to be kind of my last competitive event playing Azalea in kind of its current form. And had I scrubbed out right away, I would have been a little bit disappointed. But yeah, obviously, finish was a lot better than I was expecting. My goal was day 2, and I thought that was a pretty high goal. So yeah, I'm really happy with how it finished, and I actually kind of have the itch. Like, I know I shouldn't and probably can't, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, ooh, is there any way I can make it to Battle Hardened Charlotte to get one more event with this deck? Because I absolutely love this deck. It's just absolute blast to play. I tried playing a couple other decks on Talishar the last couple days, just because I need to practice other decks, and I don't know, they're just not as fun. Battle Hardened Charlotte is early March. I want to say like the 3rd or something. So it's like right when spoiler season starts. But that would be the last US competitive event prior to Outsiders, which also would mean that it would be the last opportunity to have a shot at getting Azalea Living Legend points prior to Outsiders, which going into this ProQuest season was my goal. Is I want Azalea to have LL points prior to Outsiders. That said, 12-hour drive to play in a Battle Hardened with one of the a below average deck in the format is probably not a good move. The chances of me actually winning are very, very low. It would be fun, but it's probably just not going to happen. Are you like West Coast Templar? Near Vegas? Because that's where the world premieres end up being. Very cool. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. These big Flesh and Blood events are just so much fun. That coming back, like I get back from Indy and I'm going, man, the next big event isn't until Baltimore, and I wasn't even sure if I was going to Baltimore. It's like after Indy, I'm like, okay, I need to make Baltimore happen. But even then, it's like that's 2.5 months away. I want to go somewhere next weekend. Like, it's such a good time. Like these big callings and major events are like the highlights of my year. That I wish I could do more. I wish there were more, and I wish I could manage to do more. It's just obviously there aren't that many, and it's also not feasible for me to travel quite that much. All right, well that's all sleeved. Yeah, and so that was my comp season. I think. What did my total record end up being for this comp season? It would be 26-10. Yeah, 26-10 on Azalea this competitive season, which for being on Azalea, I would say is pretty good. Oh, nice. Yeah, sneaking in on 7th seed is always good. Oh 6 hours. 6 hours is so manageable. It really depends on like if you can afford to take that weekend trip, if you've got people to go with. But 6 hours is very doable. I did Columbus twice. That's about a 6 hour trip, and it battle hardens there. It's just so much fun. Now Azalea's just busted. Spread the word. Best deck in the format. Except against Oldham. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, like that 5 to 6 hour trip is very, very doable. It's just Charlotte is like 12 for me, which is a little more than I'd like to do for a weekend trip. And I'd also have to convince other people to go because gas and hotel and all that stuff gets a bit expensive. I don't know. I'll see about it. But yeah, the plan is I'm gonna make Baltimore work. Yeah, I think that was a big thing with Azalea for a long time is we were missing a couple pieces, and also the deck lists we were playing just weren't as good as they could have been. Even looking at my old deck lists, I kind of the original mindset that we all had playing Azalea was, hey, Azalea has access to these disruptive on hits. Let's lean into that. Azalea has access to dominate. Let's lean into that. And so the deck was very focused on disruption and dominate. And I've learned playing the deck that disruption and dominate are not good at winning games. They are tools towards winning the game, but you need damage. And that's where Bolt and Shot came in. After it was printed, no one played it. It was, or some people did. Some people played the reds, and I finally put the reds in my deck, and I was like, oh, this actually feels pretty good, because I needed another 0-cost arrow. And then I was like, wow, this card feels really good. And I put in yellows, and I put in blues, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I have access to so much more explosive turns than I ever did before in this deck. And it has upped the consistency because you've got arrows that have go again but are still arrows and are efficient. Yeah. So I think, not to brag or toot my own horn or whatever, but like I think the more recent iterations of Azalea that I've kind of spearheaded are a big part of why the deck feels better. Well, you probably said something, Templar, and I ignored you, because there were other cards like Headshot that other people mentioned, and I kind of dismissed, and have finally come around on. It's much easier when you've got friends to split the drive with, yeah, for sure. It's definitely the way to do it. Baltimore will be a really good time. Did you make it to Jersey last year or Worlds? Actually, no, you weren't at Worlds. Did you make it to Jersey pitch deck? 50 cal. The itch for majors is a serious thing. Traveled a lot last year. Yeah, it's such a good experience. It's rough this year with Flesh and Blood that they have slowed down they've slowed down the competitive events a little bit this year. I think part of that is with Channel Fireball. There were some issues last year, and so they don't have enough event organizers right now. I'm hoping they get it up and going again with more events, but right now we're kind of slow on them. Oh, Templar, were you talking about just in Lexi? Because in Lexi, everyone's been on Rainbow Bolt and Shot since inception. I was talking about specifically Bolt and Shot in Azalea. It was overlooked for a long time. Costly at times. Yeah, for sure, Jonathan. It is costly, and I've been lucky enough to do, or I've been lucky enough to where I'm flexible enough with my job schedule, and I've been doing well enough in these events that oftentimes my pricing has been able to mitigate a lot of my travel costs. So it isn't. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have enough winnings to chip into my travel costs, which is tough when I ask a bunch of people, "Hey, you want to travel with me?" and they are not able to do as well or cut into those top cuts. And so their expense on the trip is a lot higher than mine. Interesting. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm running them now, Templar. I just never saw it before. I was always focused on disruption. Vanilla damage is not what we want. We're a hero that has access to disruption, so let's focus on disruption. And turns out vanilla damage is good. It's a lot better than people think, and it's also really important in matchups that don't care about your disruption. Things like Oldham or Icelander, like, our disruption doesn't mean anything. The only thing that matters is the number on the card. But yeah, that's what I got for the comp season. If anyone else has any last minute questions or discussion points, I'd be glad to chat a little bit, but otherwise I'll go ahead and cut the stream here in a few minutes. Appreciate everyone hanging out. It's I had originally planned on making this into just a video, and I was like, I don't know how I want to format this. It's going to be a really long thing of me just rambling. And I was like, you know what? Whatever. We'll just make it a stream. So yeah, I wasn't sure how many people would show up. I appreciate that you guys have. It's definitely a lot more fun when people are in here talking. I also needed to re-sleeve my deck. Or decks. So that was kind of my filler, because I need to fidget with something while talking. Otherwise I just need something to fidget with. Yeah, that's a pretty good play. I've become a really big fan of Tunic, Death Dealer, Buff, Bolt and Shot, E-Strike, draw a card. Yeah, 100% 50 cal. It's never like, I'm not going to events going, all right, I need to top 32 to break even, or I need to top 8 to make money at this event. Like, it's not profitable, but it's, hey, all of a sudden the net amount of money spent went down a bunch because of the pricing. Yeah, for sure. Like, if you've got any specific questions, feel free to ask. Most of the like general questions get covered in various videos, which I can point you to. But if there's anything that you want clarified or specific questions on a topic, let me know. As far as, I guess, Azalea or Flesh and Blood in general, be glad to help out, because sounds like you've got a pretty strong base in card games. You just are pretty new to Flesh and Blood. Hey Nathan. So unfortunately we don't have the pitch base to deal with a ton of arcane, which means the way you deal with arcane damage is racing. So more raw damage is important. Things like Oasis Respite and Feign Death seem really good on paper. However, in practice, we're still playing a ranger, which means we can't sit on a Feign Death in Arsenal. We can't sit on an Oasis Respite in Arsenal until the prime time to use it. Because we're playing out of our arsenal, we just it has to show up at the right time, otherwise it doesn't do much. And so for that reason, I don't like Oasis Respite or Feign Death in the deck. The way that I've found to deal with Kano is you kill him before he can combo you. Or dominate, seek, and destroy Arrow in order to force him to try and combo or lose the Aether Wildfire. Trying to hope that your Feign Death is drawn exactly when he goes for his combo is just not a consistent game plan, I don't think. And as far as Icelander, just running at her has felt really good. I kind of just hit her in the face and she dies. I actually really like the Icelander matchup. Outside of Channel Lake Frigid Turns, I don't think that she can slow you down enough. And she also can't disrupt you enough or keep up in damage. Because Azalea is weird when compared to other aggro decks in that your damage per card scales not exponentially, whatever the opposite of that would be. It's the opposite of exponential, to where your damage per card goes down the more cards you have. So things like Aether Ice Vein or Brain Freeze or Frostbites and stuff don't actually hurt us as much as they hurt other aggro decks. They actually do a lot less. So like Coronet Peak against like a Phi will often stop 4 to 5 damage, whereas against us it stops like 1 to 2 on average. Because we were having a hard time using that extra card. We wanted to block with it. So losing it to Coronet Peak doesn't hurt us the same way. But yeah, the Kano matchup is not great. I actually just played it at locals tonight and I died. I got close. Yeah, blocking out Arcane is just not efficient. Even though we have AB2, we don't have the blues to block Arcane. And especially against Icelander, I think the biggest thing that I've learned and I try and tell people about the matchup is against Icelander, your blues and your yellows are not there to block Arcane. They're there to play through Frostbites. So if you have a hand with like a blue and a yellow, oftentimes I'll just not AB anything and just play. And then when they try and disrupt me, I've got the Frostbites to deal with it, or I've got the pitch to deal with it. When you start pitching to block Arcane, you find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough resources to deal as much damage as you wanted. And blocking the Arcane just often isn't efficient. Like blocking 2 Arcane with a yellow, or even blocking 2 Arcane with a blue because you only have AB2, is basically using it as a 2-block. Blocking with 2 blocks is bad. You play them proactively, ideally. So once you get in that mindset of being the aggressor, I think you'll find a lot more success into Wizards. Thanks for stopping by, 50 Cal. Thanks and best of luck to you as well. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call it there. Thanks everyone for stopping by and watching. And I will maybe put out a deck tech, something on the deck. I don't know. You all know I'm inconsistent. But hopefully there'll be more content in the near future. It's the plan, at least. All right.